Preseason is going to be a very interesting one for the Winnipeg Jets. Lots of prospects vying for major NHL roles. Who do you want to keep an eye out for in this upcoming preseason? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, in the wake of the Patrick Laine news and everything, it's time to refocus, I guess. Somebody in the comments made a note about it's, perhaps good that this is sort of over. Now we are moving on to the future. The past is a bygone. One of the final few, I guess, pieces that we were sort of talking about with respect to former Jets has now found a new home elsewhere. And so Winnipeg is now focused more on the present and future with their pool of young players. And I think if you're being honest, this year is a bit of a mystery box. I don't think any of us really has like a great handle on what this year is going to be like, but at least for the time being, preseason's coming up, and this is going to give us one of our first real looks at some of the new kids and sort of how they're going to look maybe against closer to NHL competition. Now, let's be real, right? Preseason, you're going to be facing a lot of young rookies, maybe some journeyman veterans, some minor league guys, and some PTOs. So, let's not get too crazy here and maybe overhype things. I know I love to do that, especially when it comes to our best prospects, because who doesn't love overhyping your young talent? But I think for the Jets this year, it's really imperative that they find a good balance for the kids early, because we have a lot of young players coming in. Even just one or two is a pretty big addition when you're thinking about there only being 18 skaters active at a time. So a lot to consider. But before we dive into this episode, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets are obviously rolling in here to preseason in just a couple of weeks, a little over a month from now, I guess you could technically say. Actually, as of today, just about a month now, since it'll be starting on the 21st. But really, that time flies by. I mean, it's only like 3 or 4, or it's only about 4 weeks, and that tends to move very quickly. So for Winnipeg, obviously things are still very much up in the air, and we'll talk about some stuff towards the end of the episode, trying to figure out what exactly the Jets are doing about their trades, because they do have a couple that they sort of need to figure out sooner than later. But for preseason, there's some guys that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, and one of the first really big names is actually going to be Cole Perfetti. The reason I put Perfetti as a ones to watch is because Arniel, when he was asked about where Perfetti will play, already said he wants him on the wing, but he said he would give him some run-in as a center in camp and stuff. So for me, I'm curious to know how long that experiment lasts. Does he do enough to impress as a center? Does he maybe solve your 2C question without even needing to resort to a trade? I think that would, for me, be the more ideal scenario, just because if you could internally develop Perfetti as an NHL caliber top 6 center, that is a tremendous burden lifted off of this team. That's not to say that Perfetti as a winger is valueless or anything. It's just easier to replace players out wide than it is guys who are manning that middle role and who have that additional responsibility and playmaking lift. So if he does somehow earn the 2C role over somebody like Nemesnikov, wow, that would be a huge step for Perfetti, and B, also kind of a big surprise. I don't know that I'm really mapping that out in my head, especially because then, Lambert kind of falls into place as maybe somebody who can be used more as a winger. I don't know yet where Brad's going to play, but I think the Jets not having to immediately turn to him as a major center in the next couple of seasons probably isn't the worst thing. We've seen guys like Roslovic try to be converted to center, and I think Lambert's a little more of a natural fit there than Roslovic was, but Jack just really struggled. And so he does kind of serve as like a warning sign that maybe, Lambert will take some time to adjust, and we shouldn't put all of our eggs in that basket of him being the 2C. I think if Perfetti does enough to really earn that role, that would be the best scenario. Perfetti is very skilled. He certainly played center at other stages of his career, although he hasn't really done it recently. And so, in the short term that he did it as a Jets player when Winnipeg was going through some injury stuff, I mean, he did pretty well. I think the defensive numbers were generally strong. Offensively, I do think that there was some hesitation in his game, and it felt like, some of the involvement that he's allowed to have out wide was perhaps a little muted. But I think if you give him more ice time and allow him to sort of figure out the position at this level a little bit more, and he starts to get more on page and in sync with his line mates, I think that could change things. So he is one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Obviously, his contract stuff notwithstanding, he is going to have a pretty big year for the Jets, I anticipate. And so long as he stays healthy, I think he could be a major impact forward, scoring maybe even 60 or 70 points this year. He's already had, 38 last season, and he was basically playing like third line minutes on the high end, more often closer to fourth line than third line minutes. So very excited about him. And if he does do enough to earn the 2C role, watch out. That would give the Jets so much more flexibility, and suddenly you can start to look at the Jets lineup a little bit differently. Kind of on a related note, where Kyle Connor sort of slots in as we start getting further into preseason would also be interesting. Obviously, we're not going to see him for a while through the first couple of games, but once the starters start to filter in, Arniel was very non-committal about the top six. And I think he was non-committal insofar as he wouldn't say, that Connor and Scheifele are actually going to play together. He kind of told us in so many words that he doesn't really care for that combo. I think you have to read a little bit between the lines here, and I could be mistaken, but based on the way that he sort of addressed the question with CJOB, I got the sense that he tends to like Ehlers, Scheifele, and Vilardi more. But where you start to run into a question, like a bit of a conundrum here and sort of a question is, how much say does Scheifele have? Because if Scheifele doesn't want to play with Ehlers, that makes it a little bit of a dicey situation. I think Arniel needs to kind of be the decision maker here and sort of put his foot down a little bit. To some degree, even, when you're talking to players and certainly getting their on-ice performance and perspective, at the end of the day, it's got to be the decision maker who makes that call. And I think Arniel probably needs to be the one with a little bit of a firmer hand to say, look, I know that this may be a challenge, but, you're playing a professional game, and ultimately, I like your chemistry with guys like Ehlers. It actually works really well, and it's kind of weird that, Scheifele has apparently suggested it's hard to play with him. That's at least the rumor. I can't speak for Scheifele. Maybe he feels differently about this, but if it is the case, it's kind of funny because they really score loads of points together. So he may be hard to play with, and he may be unpredictable, but I promise you, if you keep playing together, your season totals are going to start to look pretty inflated. So for Scheifele, I just hope that he's willing to play along here and sort of go with it, because I think Connor playing with Perfetti on the second line is just a much better duo. Those guys are great together. We saw some early returns of their chemistry, and I thought that they played off of each other's strengths and weaknesses really well. It's what I'm hoping for this upcoming season. And so for that reason, if we're kind of keeping an eye on Perfetti, I think the same eye has to be kept on Connor once he starts to get into the lineup for the end of preseason. I just want to see where he plays. I think it'd be nice if we got away from the Connor and Scheifele combo that we are so accustomed to. The only way that you can really make it work with, I would say, some level of success is when you have Ehlers up there, but it's just not the best way to arrange it, right? So we'll keep an eye on that, but obviously those two, Perfetti and Connor, are not the only players I'm watching this preseason. There's a couple of other guys that I'm going to keep an eye on, and we may not even get to every single name tonight, but we're going to get through some of the most important ones. And coming up, I thought it might be worth talking about not only some of the kids, but also one particular blue line prospect who is not Ville Heinola. It's another one. We'll talk about him in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, thought it would be worth chatting about our friends and partners at Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Those of you who watch, all of these sports and stuff, you know that assembling a championship team requires a lot of patience, a lot of time, and it can be difficult to find the right fit. A work team is much the same way, and you need a partner who can help you identify top quality candidates fast. Indeed does that and more, helping you schedule, screen, and message so you can connect with candidates faster and avoid a lot of the most unfun busy work. And, Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. As somebody who has actually used Indeed myself, when I was looking for work, I can confirm it is a great platform, very detailed, very step-by-step, shows you all of these different categories for your resume, documentation, and it actually matches you to jobs that really fit not only your experience background, but also your salary requirements. So for an employer, I have to imagine this is a fantastic way and a very convenient way to actually find lots of quality candidates. That's why there's 3.5 million businesses worldwide already that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And I think you should join in. Listeners of this show will even get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Locked On Jets podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on today's episode as we are just, we're chatting about the preseason and some off-season fun stuff. I think at this point, we're kind of looking more ahead to the upcoming preseason in a couple of weeks, and specifically, who we should be keeping an eye on. We talked about Cole Perfetti and, Kyle Connor, perhaps a little bit related together. These two guys, obviously, I'd like to see them play together, and maybe we'll see that happen at some point during the regular season. But, of course, you're probably like, well, all right, that's fun, but who else should we be keeping an eye on? We haven't talked about the prospects yet, and I think that's where you run into some interesting conversations about, in particular, Nikita Tripakov and Brad Lambert. We've talked about Brad Lambert a lot, so I'm going to keep some of the thoughts here relatively short and brief. Before we get into those, though, just wanted to let you know that, again, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. While we're at it, please make your second listen the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, I've talked a lot about Brad Lambert the last few months. I mean, there's not been as much to talk about otherwise. And with the 2C question continuing to hover over Winnipeg, Lambert is the guy that everyone keeps pointing at. And I'm telling you right now, I just don't think it's going to happen immediately. If it does at all, I think if he does not become the second line center eventually, I don't think you should be disappointed. I think you can feel like maybe it would have been better if he moved out to that position, but I still think no matter whether he plays as a winger or as a center, look, I think he's going to be a great player. I think he's going to be a high impact NHL forward. I have a lot of time for him, and I just feel like, regardless of where he plays, he's going to do good stuff for the Jets, but just be prepared. It may not be as a center. I think, to some degree, we just have to sort of expect that, he may be better suited to a wider position if the decision-making and speed of his reads perhaps take some time to grow. So in preseason, I sort of want to see how Arniel views him. I'm going to guess he'll get some looks at center, but I think he's predominantly going to be used as a wing. I'm having a hard time really envisioning him mainlining as a center in the first year or two. He may get there eventually, but I think it's going to take some time, and I think he has to earn the trust from the coaching staff, which is a lot for a young kid. It's easy to forget he's just like 20-ish or so, and so, young kids these days coming into the league, they aren't having immediate success the way they used to. Some of them do, Bedard being one of them, but a lot of the other players have hit a bit of a skill wall, and it's tough. It takes time to get used to the NHL because the barrier for entry now is really friggin' high. So just prepare for that. I think we'll see him in center during preseason, but I don't think that that's going to be the long-term plan once the year actually starts. I could be wrong. Arniel could totally be surprised, and if Lambert does enough to immediately prove that he is actually good enough for this role, well, I'm certainly willing to change my mind. That's for sure. I certainly want to keep an open mind to it. I'm preparing myself for that not to be the case. Shibrikov, I feel like he's probably somewhere in the bottom six. I just don't see a role for him yet further up the lineup. And I think the best role for him is going to be in like a forechecking scoring role, which kind of fits when you're thinking about Lowry. That sort of third line or fourth line role, I think, is going to be a great fit for his rookie season. I think he's going to really thrive in these minutes. We already saw him score his first NHL goal, and that release was sick. If he really starts to hit it off this year, and he is one of our most, I would say, underrated prospects, and somebody who I think has a much higher ceiling than people realize, he could start to push further and further up the lineup as the years go on. I think this year, probably not, but perhaps in subsequent seasons, as we have contracts expiring and stuff, Shibrikov might legitimately work his way up the lineup. He is super exciting. I think he's one of our most highest skilled and immediately translatable sort of players at the NHL level, more so perhaps than even Brad Lambert, just because Shibrikov at this stage is a little more complete. His ceiling is not as high in my mind as Lambert's is. I think Lambert has, I wouldn't say franchise level talent, but I would say he has elite level talent. Shibrikov might be a step below that, but it's not as far off as you might think. So he is primed for a really big year. I think both of them are going to be players I'm keeping an eye on to see where they sort of place in preseason, especially once the starters are back. That's going to give us more insight into how Arniel sees them and what sort of deployments he wants to give the kids as he sort of, both eases them into the NHL lifestyle and also gets significant contributions out of them. He's not going to just, sort of handhold through the whole process. He's going to need them to step up, and I think that that's going to be reflected pretty early. But he doesn't want to throw him into the deep end either. So that balance is pretty crucial. Now, I did say I was thinking about one defender who's not Ville Heinola, and that's Elias Salomonsson. Elias, I think, is one of those guys who really right now is a fringe NHL candidate for this year's roster just because the Jets' blue line is pretty backed up. But I think, he's going to make a really strong case in camp and preseason. And I think I don't know if he's necessarily too good for the Moose. I think at this point, and it's always weird to explain this, but like the AHL is not necessarily a developmental league, right? There's a lot that's different in the A's game, and there's a lot of stuff that's certainly translatable and carries over. I think it can help you really evaluate how to be a pro in North America, and there's a lot of foundational stuff that can be really crucial in getting used to a team's culture. But Salomonsson might honestly benefit more from playing at the NHL level than at the AHL level, because for him, he's so mature and beyond his years. He's been playing pro hockey for a couple of years now already, in the same vein that Heinola was when he was in Finland. And it's certainly not at the same level necessarily, but he has been playing high-level Swedish hockey. And so Salomonsson, for me, I'm curious to know how he does in preseason, because every time I see him, he's so composed. Like, the dude just doesn't seem to sweat. He makes clean breakout passes. He skates out of transition well. Obviously, he'll have a couple of rookie things that you'll notice here and there, some maybe hasty passes and decisions as he's trying to make something happen. But on the whole, he is a very mature prospect. You would think he's more like 23 or 24 with some of the reads and decisions that he makes. He's defensively very sound. He's a great skater. And so I have a hard time, thinking about him as an AHL player this year. But based on the roster and the way the Jets are sort of building out their blue line, I also don't see a spot for him yet. I think he would at best be fighting with Colin Miller, and Miller got a 2-year deal. So clearly Colin figures to be a bigger part of this year's blue line, and I think Salomonsson might be more of like an injury call-up. But I also would not be shocked if he gets a real look in a third pairing role. I just think he's a super smart player. I think his ceiling is really high. I think he could be the eventual replacement for DeMello as Dylan continues to age out. It's not going to be immediate, but I'm telling you, Salomonsson is one of those guys that I think the Jets are keeping a really close eye on. I think they think very highly of him. I would expect that he is a serious contender for the top 4 next season once Pionk's deal is up. I think he, for me, is one of our top 3 or 4 prospects, and he doesn't really get talked about it as much, in part because his game's not flashy or sexy. There's no big point scoring. But I promise you, if you're looking for somebody who can stabilize your blue line with good puck moving ability, Salomonsson might be that guy. So keep an eye out for that. I'm excited about him. I'm very interested to see what he does this year. And even if he does, basically anchor the top pairing for the Moose, certainly just getting reps in North America is going to be helpful. So excited. Lots of young players that I think are going to be making strong cases for the roster, and there's probably guys who are going to come through camp and really surprise us and really seem like they might have a shot at an NHL spot this year. It's going to make the decisions difficult, but hey, that's a pretty good problem to have. Now, not everything about this offseason has been a great vibe. I want to talk about the fact that the Jets still have a number of ticking time bombs hanging over their heads, and sort of whether or not we're even going to see any of these resolved before the season starts. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know about a super cool offer from our friends and partners at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel already because they're America's #1 sportsbook. And of course, with the offseason being the way it is, not exactly the most exciting time for a lot of us, especially if you only watch hockey, right? You're thinking, man, I need something else to watch. I need some tournaments, some international stuff. I can only get, by with prospect hockey highlights for so long. Well, I get it. We all do. We all need some sports and love in our lives. But you know what? We've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5. That's just $5. And you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you need is a YouTube TV base plan, which you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game with, and a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. It's really easy to get this YouTube TV base plan, and then, of course, this 3-week trial will let you watch some of the most exciting upcoming NFL action here over the next few weeks. Obviously, we're about to kick off the season. Preseason's wrapping up. As a Ravens fan for me, great time to be alive. Hoping this year actually ends up with something a little bit more concrete in terms of a title, but maybe you're a Vikings fan. Sorry about McCarthy. I know that one was, that just sucks, man. That's tough for the kid, but hoping for a quick recovery. In the meantime, I forget who's even on your depth chart at this point, but good luck. And I'm sure that you'll want to catch up with the Vikings anyways. But to get started, you just have to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Hey, friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's closing thoughts, as we are just talking about, real quick, some thoughts about, the trade stuff that the Jets have yet to really resolve. I don't want to say like I'm nervous, but I am a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie. The McGroarty thing and the Ehlers question have sort of been ever-present questions throughout this entire offseason, and like the Jets really haven't seemingly gotten much closer to solving any of it. And I don't want to say that in like a derogatory sense, or the fact that the Jets need to solve this right now and get through it. I think that's not necessarily fair, right? But I think Winnipeg really does need to answer these questions sooner than later. McGroarty is going to go back to school, most likely. That's perhaps not the most ideal scenario. I think if you're hoping for him to sort of figure out if he's going to play for the Jets or if he wants to force his way off the team even still, you want to get this sorted out sooner than later. But for the Jets, McGroarty presents a real chance to upgrade the team. And the longer that this kind of sits as an unanswered question, it's just time that's wasted. And I really feel like Winnipeg could use him to either shore up your blue line or figure out something perhaps for your future middle six center question. It's not going to lead to like the best return is my guess, But at this point, you just don't want it to get to the point where he can take one more college season after this and then walk to free agency. That's not ideal. It's a really tough position the Jets are in. It sucks. I think McGroarty maybe got some bad advice from his agent, but I mean, that's just my opinion. Maybe others disagree, but I feel like his agent kind of forced all of this to happen, and now everyone's sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for something to finish out here. And then you've got the question with Ehlers, and look, Ehlers may not get traded. Maybe they just use him as like an internal rental. I feel like that's, I don't love that. As much as I love Ehlers, I think you probably do need to figure out if you want to sign him at all. I don't even know what his thinking is at this point because, a lot's changed since the offseason started, and Bones has retired. The Arneal regime is seemingly pushing this analytics direction, and that would kind of indicate that Ehlers would be a bigger part of the team in that respect. But maybe that's a question that they revisit as they get closer to the trade deadline and figure out if Nick wants to stick around. Having, half a season of Ehlers would be great so long as he stays healthy. I think that's very helpful for the Jets. The other part of me silently, or perhaps not so silently, does worry a bit about what happens if Nick gets injured, right? Then you're in a really tough spot because you can't trade him, and especially if it's long term, you are just stuck. So do you let this get into the season and then make a deal? I just don't know, man. I really feel like either way you go with this route, losing Ehlers, it's just not going to help the team. He's one of your best skaters. He's one of your best transition playmakers. And whatever the Jets get back in return, it's not going to equal the same value. Maybe one day it does down the road, but as of right now, I can almost guarantee you whatever they get in return, not going to be the same quality. So the Jets are in a bit of a tough spot. Darned if you do, darned if you don't. But I think they need to kind of figure it out sooner than later because, the longer this question goes unanswered, the Jets are going to make plans with their top six. They're going to make plans around McGroarty, and they kind of need both of these guys to pick their futures sooner than later. Maybe Ehlers has already decided on his. Same with Rucker. Now it's just finding a partner. But I really hope that at least one of these deals gives the Jets some help, either on the back end or down the middle. I don't know that I'm expecting either to really happen, but it certainly would be nice. I think the Jets are definitely looking for some help, some experience, and some skill to draw from, but maybe on the younger, prime age side. I don't think they want old guys. That's not really going to fit the timeline of what the Jets are going for. So, man, for all of the positive vibes coming into camp and stuff, these two questions kind of threaten to at least undo a decent bit of it. So let me know how you're feeling about all of this. Do you feel comfortable that the Jets are going in with some of these questions still yet to be decided? Are you concerned that they're not going to find out this stuff in time? What are you expecting with all of this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that, though, is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here later this week, either tomorrow or on Friday for even more offseason coverage. So, again, thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.